Hi and welcome back. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to the Visual Basic Editor. This is the place where you write your code and you store your code. We will also get acquainted with the different components of the Visual Basic Editor, be it the toolbar, the menu bar, the different kind of windows like Project Explorer, Immediate Window, Properties Window, etc. We will also learn about 5 different kinds of code modules, and not to mention on how can we customize the Visual Basic Editor. The Visual Basic Editor is commonly known as VBAE or VBAE, which stands for Visual Basic Applications Editor. Both are correct. Feel free to choose whatever you want. I prefer to call it VBAE because it is shorter. This is the place where you store your code. By default, the VBAE is hidden. I'm going to show you 3 different ways on how to access the VBAE. The very first way is using a shortcut key, which is Alt F11. You press the Alt button on your keyboard and then you press F11 and the Visual Basic Editor opens. Let's close this for a moment so that we can test the other 2 methods. The second way is through the Developer tab. If you do not see the Developer tab and if you're unsure how to make the tab visible, then see the video how to enable the Developer tab in Excel 365 for Windows, where I shared 3 different ways to enable the tab. So let's click on the Developer tab. Once you're on the tab, hover your mouse over the first button, which is Visual Basic. You will notice that it also shows you the shortcut key, which is Alt F11. Now let's click on that and you will notice that the Visual Basic Editor opens. This is the second way to open it. Let's close this. The third way is to right click on the sheet tab name. If you look at the bottom, the sheet name is displayed there. Simply right click on any sheet name and click on View Code and the Visual Basic Editor will open. The only difference in this method is that when you right click on the sheet tab and click on View Code, it opens that particular sheet's code module. I will talk about sheet code module later in this video. If I need to explain it in a simple sentence, I would say that every sheet has its own sheet code module, where you can store code specific to that sheet. And if you want to quickly access it, then simply right click on the sheet name and click on View Code. This is the fastest way to access the sheet code module, and hence this is the advantage of using this method. The Visual Basic Editor has several components. Let's visit them one by one. Right on top is the menu bar. This is like any other menu bar which gives you access to different options. I will cover some of them later in the video. Right below the menu bar is the standard toolbar. This is the default toolbar when you open VBAE. This toolbar has a lot of buttons which you will frequently use. For example, if you want to jump from Visual Basic Editor to Excel worksheet, then you can click on View Microsoft Excel button, which is here, and it will take you to the worksheet. And to go back, click on the Visual Basic button in the Developer tab and you'll be back. Then you have the Save button, which you can click on to save any code that you have written or recorded. Similarly, you can click on Run Sub User Form button. Shortcut key is F5 to run a macro or launch a user form. The Reset button is to stop the code, and so on. You can add remove buttons to the toolbar. To do that, click the toolbar options drop down. Hover your mouse over add remove buttons. From the pop-up, select the standard toolbar and then you can select deselect. So let's say if I remove reset and break, these buttons will disappear. And if you mess up by any chance, do not worry. Simply click on this again, go there and click on Reset Toolbar. When you do that, Excel will ask you if you want to reset the changes made to the standard toolbar. Simply click on OK and it's done. So if you go to the Visual Basic editor, you'll see that your buttons are back. The other thing that I recommend is activating the edit toolbar. To do that, right click on a blank area of the menu bar and select edit. Feel free to drag it and arrange it wherever you want. I usually like keeping it next to the standard toolbar like this. This toolbar is important because it gives you access to indent, outdent, comment, uncomment blocks. I use these 4 buttons a lot when I'm writing code. Let's take an example and see how we can use them. I'm quickly going to write a couple of lines, but first let me insert a module. Right click on your project name, hover your mouse over insert and then click on module, and a module will be inserted. Double click on the module to access the module code window. Here I will write a very simple procedure. Subsample, message box, hello world. To indent the message box line, select the line and then click on the indent button. And to remove the indent, click on the outdent button. If you noticed, when you hover the mouse over these 2 buttons, it also shows you the shortcut keys. The shortcut key for indent is tab and for outdent is shift tab. So instead of using these buttons, you can also use the shortcut keys. However, if you want to use the shortcut key on a single line, deselect the line, move the cursor at the beginning of the line and then press the tab key. If you do not do that and if you press the tab key on a selected single line, it will delete that line. So if I select this and I press tab key, everything will be deleted. So I'll press Ctrl Z. You can use the tab key on multiple lines. So if you say, I've selected 3 lines here. Now if I press the tab key, see how it indents. And to outdent, you can press the shift tab button and the indent will be removed. Next to these buttons, we have comment and uncomment buttons. You can use this to comment and uncomment the code. A lot of times when you're cleaning up your code or when there are version changes, you do not want a particular set of codes to run, but you want them to still be part of your code. You never know, you may want to use them later in the future. In that case, you simply comment those lines. Ensure that the code is highlighted and then you click on the comment block. If you move your cursor away, you will notice that the lines have been now commented using an apostrophe. To remove this comment, simply select it again and click on uncomment block and the code will be uncommented. You can alternatively insert an apostrophe manually before the line to comment it. So for example, I just want to comment the message box line. So I'll just insert an apostrophe before it and the line will be commented. You can also use comments to describe what a statement or block of statement does. For example, this procedure, it shows a message box. So I can leave a small description above the procedure. So what I'll do is I'll press enter and start with an apostrophe and I can say the below procedure shows a message box. Comments are useful because if you look at your code, say after 6 months, then it will be easier understanding what the code does. Now this is a very simple procedure. Imagine you have thousands of lines and you have to look at them after 6 months. You will not know what the code does because you must have worked on so many other projects. So always comment your code. On the left side is the Project Explorer. Here you can see all open workbooks and add-ins if there are any. Within the VBA project of the open workbook, this is the open workbook here, you can see the different Microsoft Excel objects. For example, you can currently see the code module of Sheets, this workbook and module 1. In this section, you can also see user forms and class modules when you create them. We will talk about user form modules and class modules in one of the future videos when we are actually working with them. In short, the Project Explorer is like a Windows Explorer. Here, it is the Explorer of your Excel objects. Right below the Project Explorer is the Properties window. If you do not see this window, then you can activate it either by clicking the Properties window button, which is here, or by pressing the F4 shortcut key. So if I close this and if I click on this button, I will get the Properties window back. If I close this again and this time I press F4, I will get it back. The other way of activating this Properties window is by clicking on the View tab and then clicking on the Properties window. And we will get the Properties window back. The Properties window displays the property of a particular object. For example, if I select Sheet 1, I can see various properties of Sheet 1. This is important when you specifically, let's say, are creating an application for a client and you do not want a particular sheet to be shown. So for that, what you can do is click on the sheet and then click on the visible property. Here you can set whether the sheet should be visible or hidden by simply clicking on this button and choosing one of these options. By default, there must be one worksheet always visible. So if there are two worksheets, then you can hide one of them. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go back to the worksheet and I'm going to insert one more worksheet. And then I will go back to the Visual Basic editor, click on Sheet 1 and change the property of the sheet to hidden. Okay, so now if I go back to the workbook, you'll notice that Sheet 1 is not there anymore. Similarly, there are other properties that can be tweaked to suit our needs. Moving on the right side is the code module. Whatever object you double click on, you will get the code module of that object. So if you double click on Sheet 1, you will see the code module of Sheet 1. Similarly for Sheet 2 and this workbook. There can be 5 different modules where we can store VBA code. Let's briefly go through each one of them. The first one is Sheet Code module. So when you double click on Sheet 1, you get the Sheet Code module. Sheet Code module is an area where we can add event procedures and write macros. These macros run when the user takes a specific action in the sheet. So if you want to run a macro when a selection change happens in the worksheet, you can do that here. For example, I can select worksheet from here and by default it will select selection change, so we don't have to do anything. And then we write the code within this procedure. We will cover event procedures in details in a different video. The second module is the This Workbook code module. Each workbook contains one This Workbook object. Double click on it to access the This Workbook code module. Here as well you can add event procedures and other macros. So if you want to run a macro when the workbook opens, you can do that here. The next module is code module of module 1. The code modules are the most used modules to store macros. So we have seen 3 till now. The other 2 types of code modules are user form code modules and class modules. You can insert them by right clicking on the VBA project and then insert user form. Similarly, you can right click and insert class module. So this is the class module. Similarly, if you double click on the user form, you get the user form object. And if you double click on that, you will get the user form code module. User forms are interactive forms where we can add controls like buttons, text boxes, labels, etc. So I can arrange something like this, put a text box here and a button here. You can also access the user form code module by clicking on any of these objects. This is where you can store macros that will run when the form is active. The user can interact with the controls on the form, and based on the code, the actions will follow. So if I say a very simple line, message box, hello world, and if I run this user form, the form will run like this, and if you press the command button, it will show you the hello world message box. And the final one is class modules. Class modules allow us to write macros to create objects, properties, and methods. We will cover each of these 5 code modules in details in a separate video. The next VBAE window that we will cover is the immediate window. To launch the immediate window, in case you do not see it, is by pressing the shortcut key Ctrl G. So I'm going to press Ctrl G. And right at the bottom, you will notice that the immediate window pops up. You can also launch this window by clicking on the View tab and then clicking on Immediate Window. The immediate window is important because when you are debugging your code, you can check the value of variables and you can track other objects here. In short, you can evaluate any line of VBA code in the immediate window and it will immediately give you the result. We will cover this window in detail when we write our first code. Now let's customize our Visual Basic editor. Click on the Tools menu and then click on Options. You will be presented with an Options dialog box with 4 different tabs: Editor, Editor Format, General, and Docking. So let's cover the Editor tab first. The Editor tab has 2 sections: Code Settings and Window Settings. In Code Settings, the first setting is Auto Syntax Check. If this option is checked, and it is usually checked by default, then as you type, your code is automatically checked for syntax errors. And if there are any syntax errors found, then you are alerted with a pop-up. Excel will show you a notification. So let's take an example. So I'm going to cancel this. I'm going to module 1. Let's say I want to define a variable of a specific type. So if I type dim I as and then I press the space bar. Now Excel is expecting me to specify a type, but instead of doing that, what I do is I move the cursor or I simply press enter. See what happens. And I get an alert. Compile error, expected new or type name. If you're new to VBA programming, then I recommend keeping this setting checked. I have it turned off because I find these pop-ups frustrating. There are times when I write half sentences and may need to move to another line, say to copy the name of a variable so that I don't have to type it again and again, or copying a similar syntax just to save time. In that case, I do not want VBAE to show me a pop-up. I know what I'm doing. In such a case, VBAE still identifies the error and then shows it in a different color. So what I'll do is I'll click on OK. And then I will go back here and I will uncheck it just for a brief moment. So I will delete this and I'll say as, and then if I press enter, I do not get a pop-up. But obviously Excel highlights this. I'm okay with this because I know I will have to come back to this sentence. So I may probably copy something from here and paste it here or do some other stuff. Like I said, if you are new to VBA programming, then I recommend keeping this option checked. The next option is require variable declaration. By default, this setting is unchecked. If this setting is checked, then whenever you open a code module, VBAE will automatically insert the term option explicit at the very top of the module. This statement, which is option explicit, requires you to explicitly declare all variables within the module. If a module includes the option explicit statement, a compile time error will occur when Visual Basic encounters a variable name that has not been previously declared or that has been spelled incorrectly. I recommend keeping this setting checked. So I'm going to check this. A lot of times we misspell our variables and then we are confused as to why we are not getting the correct result. Let me give you a small demonstration. So I will uncheck this first, and then I will write a small piece of code which is dim mass as double, dim volume as double, dim density as double. Let's give them some values. So volume is equal to say 5, density is equal to 5, and to calculate mass we'll say mass equal to volume multiplied by density, and let's display the value. So I'll say MSG box MAS. Now when I run this, I will notice that I'm not getting any value. I should have got 25, but why did I not get any value? So I go back to the code and then I see everything again. Mass, double, volume, density is fine, values are correct, multiplication is correct. Oh, I did not spell it correctly. This should have been mass. Now if I run this, I will get 25. To avoid these kind of errors, simply declare option explicit at the top. And keep that setting checked. Now let's remove one S. If I have option explicit on top, then I do not have to worry about. VBAE will automatically alert me when it finds a misspelled variable. So let's try and run this. And I get an alert saying variable not defined. So I'm going to stop this code. The next setting is auto list members. By default, this setting is checked and I recommend leaving it checked. When this setting is checked, VBAE provides some assistance when you are typing your VBA code. You can also bring this auto list manually by pressing Ctrl J or Ctrl space keys. Let me quickly close this for a moment. If you saw in the code when I was declaring the variable, I was displayed a list. That's auto list. Let's try that again. I will delete double from here and also remove the space. And then I press the space button on the keyboard and I will be presented with a list. I can either choose double from the list or I can start typing and Excel will narrow down the list from which I can choose the word double. Now let me delete this again. To get the list, obviously I'll have to delete that space after the word as and then press space. If I don't want to do that, I can also use the shortcut key which is Ctrl J. You can also use Ctrl space and then just do what we did earlier. Start typing and then you can choose the relevant word. Moving on to the next setting, which is Auto Quick Info. When this setting is checked, VBAE displays information about functions and their corresponding arguments as you type. Let's go back to the code. Remember when I pressed space after the message box, what happened? So let me delete this and let me press space button on the keyboard. And you will notice that I'm shown some information in a yellow box. See how VBAE displays information of what is expecting as input. In this case, you can enter a prompt, the type of button, etc. So let's say instead of prompt, I was trying to show the value of mass. Then I'll press comma. So it's asking me what kind of button do you want to show. So let's say VB information. And then if you press comma again, see how the words are getting highlighted. So next it's expecting a title. So I can give a title, calculating mass, and we are done. So if I run this, I get calculating mass with the button that we selected and the value. And hence I recommend keeping this setting checked. The next setting is auto data tips, which is this setting. When this setting is checked, and if I step through the code and if I hover the mouse over, let's say, a variable, then you will get a pop-up window showing the value of that variable. This process is called debugging. We will learn about debugging the code in a separate video. But for demonstration purpose, I'm going to step through this code and then show you how you can see the value of the variable. So I'll click on OK. And then I will put a breakpoint here. And then I'll run this. Now, when you take the mouse cursor over the mass, do you see how it shows you mass is equal to 25? This is auto data tips. Again, I would recommend keeping this setting checked. The next setting is auto indent. Indentation represents some spaces at the beginning of a new row or statement. By default, this setting is checked. And when this setting is checked, if you press Enter key to start a new line, and if the code before you press Enter has indentation, then the new line will begin at the position of the previous indentation. If you uncheck the setting, then the new line will begin from extreme left. Let's take an example. So let's click on OK, and let me delete all of this. Let's write a very simple statement. If A is equal to 10, then. Now let's press the Enter key, see what happens. The new line, it began at the position of the previous indentation, which is right here. If you uncheck the setting, then instead of starting from here, it will start from extreme left. And let's say if you type another sentence, if B is equal to 12, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the tab key and give it another indent. And I press the Enter key. See how the indentation started from this line and not from this? Now let's see what happens when we uncheck it. So I go back here and I press Enter, and the cursor moved right at the leftmost position. I would recommend leaving this setting checked. Below the auto indent, you can also specify the tab width. The default value is 4. The maximum value that this can take is 32. But obviously you will not use 32 here, because if you use 32 and you press the tab key, see how it moves so far. We don't want our indentation to be so big, because if I'm here and I push it back, let's say I bring it right below this if and I press the tab key, it goes way too ahead. So we don't need it to be 32. Let's go back and change it to 4. 4 is a decent figure. So if I press tab now, this is good. Now let's move to Windows settings, which is this section. There are 3 settings available here. The first one is drag and drop text editing. The Visual Basic Editor allows you to move pieces of code by dragging and dropping them with your mouse. Let's test this. So if you highlight this and you press the left mouse button and drag it, see how it allows you to drag them? So this is the beauty of this particular setting. Whether you want to keep it checked or unchecked, I'll leave this decision with you. If you uncheck this setting, then obviously you will not be able to drag and drop using mouse. The next setting is default to full module view. This setting controls how you view your procedures in the code module. As the name suggests, if the setting is checked, then you will have the full module view. If it is unchecked, then only one procedure will be displayed to you at any given moment. Let's understand how this setting works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this code and I'll call it subsample A, and I'll use the same old code, message box hello world, and then I'm going to copy this procedure and paste it, let's say 4 times, and I'll call it B, C, D and E. Now you can see all these procedures together. That is because you have the full module view. Now let's see what happens when you uncheck it. You will only see one module. What if you want to see sample D? So for that, you'll have to click on this and click on sample D. And then you'll only see sample D. Similarly, if you want to see sample B, you can click on sample B. This is a setting for which I will not give you any kind of recommendation. It is totally up to you again on what kind of view you would like. I personally juggle between both the settings. And no, I do not juggle by changing the setting. There is a quicker way to do that, and that is by clicking these 2 buttons at the bottom. So if you take your mouse cursor over it, see what it says? Full module view, procedure view. So if you click on full module view, you'll get all of them together. If you click on procedure view, you'll only see one of them at a time. The last setting in the Windows settings is procedure separator. When this setting is checked, you will see your procedures separated with a line. So if I move this here, you see these lines, these are called procedure separators. So if you uncheck this setting, then these lines will disappear. Again, I leave it up to you if you want this setting checked or unchecked. The second tab is the editor format. You can use the editor format tab to customize how your VBAE looks. Let's go through the options that we have at our disposal. The code colors section allows you to determine the foreground, background and indicator colors of different kind of texts. Whatever changes you make can be previewed in the sample section. If you look at the code, the keyword is of blue color. If you wish, you can change that. For that, click on the keyword text, and this is the blue default color. Change it to, let's say, purple. Okay, if you want to change the background to red, you can do that. Obviously, it will not look too pleasing to the eye, but I'm just going to show you how it looks like. You can always go back and change it. So this is how you can change the color. I'm going to reset it to the blue color because that's what I like. I'll click on keyword, select my blue color, change the background to auto, and it's back to normal. Let's go back to the options box, editor format. So similarly, you can change the colors for selection. Right now, when you select a particular statement or a block of statements, this is how it will look like with a blue background and white text. Similarly, you have syntax error text, which is red. You can change that as well. And you have comments, which is in green. So feel free to experiment with this. The font and the size settings lets you change the font and size of the VBA code. By default, VBA uses Courier Neo, which is a fixed width font. I recommend keeping this in case you want to experiment with these two. Feel free to go ahead and do it. The margin indicator bar is the gray bar that appears on the left side. This is the gray bar which you see on the left side. This bar is very useful when we are debugging the code. We will cover this bar in detail in a different video when we are covering debugging of code. As of now, I would recommend keeping this checked. The next tab is General tab. Here you can tweak the settings for form, error handling and compiling. In form grid settings, you can choose either to show the grid or disable it. Let me cancel this for a moment and open this user form. Do you see these dotted things? These are called grids. So you can choose to show this or you can hide it. So if I go to Tools, Options and I uncheck this and I click on OK, see how it disappears? So I would recommend keeping this option checked. The form grid helps to align the controls in design time. You also have an option to change the grid units. You can change the width and the height here. For the time being, leave these settings unchanged. The Show Tooltips is self-explanatory. If Show Tooltips is checked, then tooltips will be displayed automatically whenever you hover over a particular button. So if you take your mouse cursor over this button, it says View Microsoft Excel. If you uncheck that, then you will not see those tips. The next setting is Collapse Project Hides Windows. When this setting is checked, then if you collapse a project in the Project Explorer, it will hide all associated windows. So I'll just click on Cancel. Now when you hide this, see everything on the right side is hidden. If you uncheck that setting, then see what happens. When you collapse this, the windows are still open. So I would recommend keeping that option checked, so that when you hide it, all the windows are hidden. Let's go back. The next setting is Notify Before State Loss. If this setting is enabled, then VBAE issues you a notification when you try to do something while running a code that requires resetting of all the variables in a module. We will cover this when we write our first macro and where we use a lot of variables. In the error trapping section, you have three options. If you choose Break on All Errors, break mode is entered whenever there is an error in the VBA code. If you choose Break in Class module, the break mode is entered if there is an error in the VBA code within a class module. And if you choose Break on Unhandled Errors, which is the default setting, then the break mode won't be entered if there is an error handler that traps the error. If there is no error handler, break mode will be entered. We will talk more about error handling in a separate video. Just leave the setting as it is. The last section on this tab is Compile. Compile on demand means that the Visual Basic Editor compiles the VBA code as is needed. And background compile means that the idle time is used for compiling program in the background. Again, we will not get into this in detail for the timing. I will cover this in another video. Leave this setting unchanged. The last tab is Docking. You can use the Docking tab to set the behavior of the 5 windows, which are Immediate Window, Locals Window, Watch Windows, Project Explorer and Properties window. When the setting is checked for the relevant window, then VBAE fixes that window at a certain spot along the edges of the VBAE. And if you uncheck this setting, then the windows will simply float. Let's uncheck the setting of, let's say, Immediate Window and see what happens. And I'll press OK. See? And if you minimize this, it will not dock, it will float. So let's go back and let's dock it. The other benefit of docking is, suppose you drag it out, and if you double click on the title bar of that window, it will come back to its position. I recommend keeping these settings unchanged. unless you want your windows to float around. A quick recap. In this video, we got introduced to the Visual Basic Editor, also known as VBAE. We also got acquainted with different components of VBAE, like the toolbar, the menu bar, the different kind of windows like Project Explorer, Properties window, Immediate window, etc. We also learned about the 5 different types of code module, and not to mention how we can customize the Visual Basic Editor. If you still have any questions, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below, or you can also email me on support@tmexcel.com. A quick reminder, as usual, I will be posting 2 videos every week, one on Monday and the other on Thursday. If you like the way I explain things, and if you think these videos can help you in your quest to learn Visual Basic programming from scratch, then go ahead and see my other videos, like them, and subscribe to this channel by clicking on the bell icon. And I'll see you on Monday when I talk about absolute, mixed, and relative references.